So I'm feeling like 2 minutes have passed and it's 5:30.
Right on.
Cool. Have an excellent timekeeper, which is a little weird. So tonight we're going to talk about step 5 and how to work step 5 of the 12 steps. I've made some notes up here on the board for you. I thought the first thing we'd do just briefly is review step 4 just a little bit. I know we spent 3 weeks on it. That was time well spent in my opinion. But our plan, our goal in step 4 is to master resentment. Oh, I spelled it resent.
Yeah.
Master resentment and outgrow fear. And we looked at both the resentment inventory and the fear inventory. There's 4 columns for the resentment inventory. There's 4 columns for the fear inventory. It's extremely important to do all 8 columns because the very last column, as Chris described it, is sort of this open canvas, right? This space in the inventory where you and your higher power get to write kind of a vision or paint a vision of what your future's going to look like now that you've gone through the inventory process. I talked a little bit last week about a current resentment that I had with a person at work. I thought for sure I had fully processed that by doing an inventory in my head, which my sponsor doesn't allow, but I did anyway. And what I found out, and this was very interesting to me because I've done a lot of inventory work, is I thought I understood it. I thought I'd kind of name the resentment, how it affected me, what my part was, what I was afraid of, whether there was current and historical reason for the fear, how self-reliance failed me, and what God would have me be, know, or do about that mess. I thought I had it. But something interesting that happens to me, and it's also happened to other people that I work with, is, doctors say that most physical ailments have a mental or emotional cause to them, which I think is interesting that even medical science kind of recognizes that. And if I become afraid and stay in denial about it and don't get where I need to with the resentment inventory, I get bad headaches. My head blows up. So having done the inventory in my head, unsuccessfully as it turns out, I started having headaches and I thought, oh man, if I don't get this down on paper, 5th step it, get real clear, I'm going to have headaches. So I did that. And in the writing, what God wanted me to know, be, or believe, it was a surprise to me. Like, it came as an utter surprise. And that happens to me when I write inventory. Sometimes I really do know how the writing's going to go and where it's going to end up, but I have gotten some wonderful surprises by writing the inventory out, and that is a searching and thorough and fearless way to do inventory. One of my best surprises I ever got when writing an inventory, my poor mom, I wrote about her a lot. She was kind of the person I blamed for everything. And I was writing an inventory about something that happened currently that triggered the beliefs from childhood that I'm not loved, that I'm not important, that I don't matter, and that it's not going to be okay. I went all the way through the columns, and then I got to that lovely last column when I asked what God would have me be, do, or believe about this mess, and right out the end of my pencil. So in my childhood, I perceived that I was not a favored child. That's how it felt to me. That's what I believed to be true. Now, was it really true? That's another discussion, maybe a separate discussion, right? But that's what I perceived. And so I got all through this inventory about not being loved or favored or valued or recognized. And when I got to that 8th column, right out the end of my pen came these words. Okay, so the question is, what would God have me know, be, or believe? And I asked that. I'm like, all right, what? What do you want to give me here? And out the end of my pen came these words, you are my favorite child. And I was like, well, okay. If I'm God's favorite child, So are you guys, but I don't care so much about that. If I am God's favorite child, right, if God is always with me, then I really don't have anything to fear or to squawk about. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of that process, not an accident that we spent 3 weeks on step 4. We could end up spending a couple of weeks on step 9 as well, because it's really important. Yes.
Real quick, what would God have me know, be?
Be, do, or
do?
believe. And I need my glasses in there in that orange purse. What would God have me be in terms of this situation? Do in terms of this situation, or believe in terms of this situation? God bless you. I have girl glasses tonight. Yay. I also wanted to reference really quickly the sex inventory. The sex inventory process is on page 69 and 70 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is a 14-column inventory, so a little bit different from fear and resentment. And on page 69 and 70, it talks about how to do a sex inventory. When would a person want to do a sex inventory? If they're in a love relationship with another human being that's problematic. Or, this happens too, if they've had a series of love relationships with human beings that have been problematic, especially if there's patterns to it, right? We want to figure out what's going on there. So the Big Book explains how to do that starting on page 69. It says, first, we have all had sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Those are all different columns. Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and we looked at it. We subjected each relation, so each primary love relation, to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. Remember always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow to it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that doing so will not bring about still more harm. So that's the sex inventory. And then it says on page 70, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. So this is another way of kind of taking responsibility for our own lives and for what we create. Barb, you want to say something?
All those questions, are those the columns then?
Yes,
Okay.
they are. And if you Google it online, you can probably come up with a decent template for doing a sex inventory. Okay? Anybody else got any questions? Okay, cool. So, step 5, yay. The spiritual principles around step 5 are integrity. I love that, right? A firm adherence to a code of moral or artistic values. A firm adherence, right? So doing step 5 will help us be a congruent, integrity-keeping human being, okay? The honesty required helps that. And humility. And I love the definition of humility in the AA 12 and 12, so 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, this book for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wrote it down up here. It's a clear recognition of what and who we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. Okay? So those are kind of the 2 spiritual principles I think about in connection with step 5. The reading list is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's pretty short, especially compared to step 4. It's only 3 pages, pages 72 to 75. And then again, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions on step 5 are really wonderful as well. We're going to go through a little bit of that information tonight. The musical references that I picked out are You've Got a Friend, James Taylor, I will tell you that my first experience with step 5 and my ongoing experience with step 5 felt to me like my first experience with unconditional love. Because here I sat with this person who had no dog in my fights, who was neutral about what I did, and who was willing to kind of walk me through this process. And since I define unconditional love as being able to do what is in the spiritual best interest of myself and others, you know, that sponsor relationship where I sit down and own myself. I own myself with another human being is really, really critically important. And there's some interesting things in this book about that. Lean on Me by Bill Withers. That's a great. Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll help you carry on, right? And Get By with a Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles. There are many Beatles songs that fit all of the steps. It's the coolest thing ever. I kind of went on a journey to figure that out one day, and I was like, this is cool. So I'll get by with a little help from my friends. I'm going to read you a poem later. It's called Sestina for Chair. It's about my sponsor. He has a blue chair in his office that I've spent many hours in. And it's a poem that I wrote for him about that relationship. Does that sound good? Any questions so far? Everybody good? Everybody awake? Cool. All right, so I have some spots in the big book on Step 5 that I just like to read because I think they're worth reading. So Chapter 6 is called Into Action. Step 5 is an action step as well. Having made our personal inventory, what should we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. Okay? That tells us the purpose of Step 4 and Step 5. And those are pretty big ideals.
72.
Yeah, I'm on page 72 in the big book. And then if you skip down to the second paragraph, it says, time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their housekeeping. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. So that kind of indicates to me the importance of really making a searching and fearless moral inventory and sharing it with someone. So maybe for Alanons, we're not going to get drunk. I have some pretty bad behavior that comes out when I'm in fear and resentment. I don't drink, but I become manipulative, angry, but trying to act nice. That's no bueno. So manipulative, martyring, mothering, managing, controlling. And so when I started this workshop and we were doing Step 1, I said, alcoholism almost killed me and I didn't drink, right? Alcoholism really is a family disease, and it does not just kill the alcoholic, okay? So for Alanons to embrace this idea that even though they may be the good one in their relationship, that they have things to look at too, it's really critically important to your recovery and to mine too. Okay, skipping down toward the bottom of the page, the very last chapter, it says, we must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Now, we've talked before in the workshop about the idea that if you can't see it, are you going to be able to change it? You're not, right? If you can't see it, you will not be able to change it. It will not be up for healing. You'll just be pretending. that things are okay, which is another great Alanon tool, right? I call it fingers in your ears and your eyes closed. La 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 la.
Yeah.
Not a great way to live as an adult, right? You can't change it if you can't see it. And there's something about this process. When I wrote that inventory about the work situation, my husband and I were on our way out of town. He's not a 12-step person, but I'll tell you what, he knows me pretty well. We've been married far years. That's a long time, right? So I shared the inventory with him. And man, when I did that and I told him honestly what my part was and what was really going on, my head quit hurting and I haven't had a headache since, right? Really important to own the truth about yourself. So we want to live long and happily, right? Who wants to live long and happily? Happy, joyous, free is what we're aimed at, all right? And then let me skip over to, there's some promises on step 5 too. On page 75, the first paragraph, it says that in step 5 we are engaged upon a life and death errand. It's that important. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Isn't that beautiful? Right? I became a part of the world when I did the 5th step. I've been so busy trying to manage and do all those Alanon behaviors that my life was a lie, even though I never told lies because I didn't believe in lying, right? And when I started to do a 5th step and I really told the truth about what was going on with me and took responsibility for myself, I say to my sponsees, welcome to the world, baby girl. Welcome to the world. Yeah. Thanks for joining the human race. Instead of being hidden and defended and sad and alone and scared and unsure, right? We take the time and we share with another human being what our story is. Those are the promises. Returning home, now this talks about after we've done our 5th step. I want to talk a little bit about different ways to do a 5th step. So a lot of folks will have their sponsees write their entire 5th step out. So they'll give them kind of a writing assignment. They'll say, think about the primary suspects, right? Your mom, your dad, your siblings, the person you're in love with, your children, the people you work with, your bosses. Sometimes people at church can really trigger people, right? So they'll say, think about the primary suspects, use this template for the inventory, and just get started. I do it a little bit differently. I work on what currently is going on with the people that I'm working with. Because strangely enough, when we sit down and we talk about the things that are currently upsetting them, bothering them, they're problematic, it will take us all those places, right? All by itself, right? So it doesn't have to be sort of a, here's your, what's that word for the syllabus? Syllabus. We're going to erase that part. That thing, syllabus. Okay, so instead of giving somebody a syllabus, I let what's going on in their lives direct their 5th step, and their 4th step and their 5th step. So someone like I did, and I talked about last week and this week, got in trouble with somebody at work. Okay, let's get after that. Right? And let's walk it through all of the columns. As it goes through the columns, especially that 3rd column in the resentment inventory about how I'm affected, I am, I need, I want, I'm afraid that, right? People should, my boss should, my husband should, my children, my poor children. Just be glad you're, Like, I love you all, but the people that I gave birth to, they have a special burden. Because I love them so much that, oh my God, keeping my hands off those people is it's really tough. But that's that column, that third column, where how am I affected? What was my part? And then when I get into the fears, and it says in the second column of the fear inventory, is there a current reason for this fear? And is there a historical reason for this fear, right? So the current's pretty easy. It's the thing that's going on right now that I'm writing about. But the historical can take me back in time to where those beliefs that I'm not enough, I'm not valued, I'm not safe, I'm not going to be taken care of, were created in me. And it gives me a chance to visit that, right? To visit that. And then I look at my self-reliant behavior, and then I look at what God would have me be, do, or believe. And so, a lot of Alanons talk about inner child work. I don't literally believe I have a little girl living inside of me. But when something bumps me enough that I want to behave badly, that fear that's been irritated or activated almost always goes back to something that happened when I was a little kid, even though I was a little kid a long time ago. Right? Doesn't matter, right? So working with sponsees on whatever is happening currently also is a wonderful way to look at what needs to be looked at, right? And what needs to be looked at, right? And I tell my sponsees when we get into step 4 and 5, God's going to arrange for the people that you don't particularly like to come and poke you about something. And that's so you can write about it, right? And we can talk about it, and you can get some new ideas about it and begin to master resentment and outgrow fear. It's really beautiful. So there's lots of different ways to work the steps. I had a friend that used to say, you can't do it wrong. You cannot do it. That might be a mistake, right? Because you're here, clearly something's going on, right? 12-step programs attract people that need help, right? When my sponsees get irritated at other people in the meetings, I'm like, sweetie, we're here because we're not okay, right? We're here because we're not okay. And so, welcome to the club. Why are you so intolerant of that person? Put that person's name in the first column. Let's talk about that. Okay? So, talking again about after we've done a 5th step, it says, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. Taking this book down from the shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. For, and this is another wonderful promise, for we are building an ark through which we shall walk a free man at last. At last. Right. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? Okay? If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. Okay? So step 6 is another step that I call kind of a power step. The AA 12 by 12, when it introduces step 6, it says, this is the step that separates the men from the boys, right? The women from the girls. We forgive the men that wrote this because it was a long time ago.
Yes?
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, I read this to kind of, takes me a couple times to read something before it sinks in lately. But it also said in step 5 that we can choose person or persons.
Right. Good. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
So when the big book was written, Alcoholics Anonymous was brand new, right? So there weren't a plethora of people that were qualified in the groups to really necessarily do fifth steps with everybody. This is my opinion on this. So if you want to pick a closed mouth friend instead of your sponsor, or a priest or a religious person, or a therapist, or something of that ilk, there's really not a problem with that. Here's my only caution on it. I have a caution, of course. When I'm trying to work steps with someone to start some healing and some change in their lives, I pay ridiculously close attention to everything they tell me. To everything they tell me. Because every time they talk to me, they're giving me information about who they are and what they do. And I get a really good feel for what they're afraid of, what they really need to do work on, and where the journey through the steps is going to need to go. And that evolves over the course of working the steps together. So sometimes, and I'm talking of myself here, I had so many things going on with me that I needed to look at, that what I say about that is that God took away my stuff in the order in which it was killing me, right? And each time I went through steps with a sponsor, that particular journey through the steps ended up being about some very particular things, right? And that unfolded organically in the step work. And I'll never forget, so I've been working with my sponsor off and on for a long time, maybe 18 years. I've had some breaks, but I've been working with him regularly for the last 10 to 12 years about. And I'll never forget the first time he said to me, "I have you figured out." And I was like, uh-oh, you know, because my gig as an Alanon had a lot to do with hiding and pretending, right? I'm going to be so nice, so sweet, so smart, so available, you know, so helpful, you know, that I'm going to spend my life, you know, out here doing things with not a clue really about what was going on in here. And so I think if there's so many people with rich experience in the step work, and I would be a little hesitant to kind of deviate and talk to someone else if that might be information that your sponsor really needs, kind of to help you with what you're going through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so they're saying that you shouldn't do it more than one person when they say, or persons with whom to take this intimate, confidential step.
What page are you on, Barb?
It's on 74 in this little book. It says, rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate,
Right.
confidential step.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of people doing fifth steps in like with 2 or 3 other people.
Right, like as a group.
Mark Houston talks
Oh.
about that
Yeah,
a
a group
lot.
impact.
Really
Right. And
helps.
you know, there may be people that are brave enough to do that
Yeah.
and can still really tell the truth about what's going on.
Mhm.
I have attracted some people to work with that have had shockingly difficult lives. Shockingly. And so when people are really frightened, you know, they don't behave. They can't behave, right? And so I think for a lot of people, the one-on-one would maybe work better. You probably already know that I'm pretty much okay with saying whatever up here, but I've been working steps diligently for 20 years.
Yeah, there was a mustard seed group, and they did it the old way, old way, which was they did their 4th and 5th steps right there. They did the 3rd step without reservation. They all held hands and
Nice.
said it. Yeah. But maybe
Yeah.
that's what they
Yeah,
meant when they
gotcha.
wrote this.
Could be, Barb.
I don't know.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways to look at this. I don't have the right way, okay? I don't. I have the way that worked for me, right? So if you work with me as a sponsee, if you come to me, I can't give you something I don't have. I can give you the way I've done it and the way that's worked for me. And you should be sort of attracted to your sponsor. When you're in meetings, you should be able to kind of hear when this person speaks, you can kind of feel that they have something that you need, right? You can feel that. You can feel it, right? And so when people come to work steps with me, I work steps with them the way I work steps, because that's what I got, friends. I don't have something else, right? I work steps the way I work steps. Diane?
Yeah, I was just thinking about step 5 too, and the nuances. Like, it didn't happen my first time through the steps, but my second time, my second sponsor really took that paragraph and said, now you're going to take an hour, and you're going to go to a silent place, and you're going to sit for an hour, and these questions, the propositions in that step, you're going to read through these 5 propositions, and then you're going to read these questions. And then I had to call her after I sat for an hour, exactly an hour, not 59 minutes, not 61.
I love Posse sponsors.
Yeah, I needed it.
Yeah.
And, we get what we need.
Yeah.
And it was a really profound experience for me to sit, because it started to get me into that place of contemplative. It started to prepare me almost for going forward.
Cool.
So I just wanted to share that, because I didn't get that. We're all different, like you said. We use it, but different sponsors grow us.
Yes.
And that grew me.
And I think we attract exactly what we need for exactly sweep the floors, and nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that.
Question.
Yeah.
You said when people are really frightened, did you say they can't behave?
Yes, I did.
Could you expand a little bit?
So this is a personal belief, okay? So just like everything that we've talked about, but fear to me is the bottom line on all bad behavior on the planet. I believe that you're either in fear or you're in love. When you're in love, good to go, right? Good to go. Go make friends and do whatever you're ready to do and willing to do. When you're afraid, that's when Chris referred to it last week, and it says in the big book that fear actually blocks us from the sunlight of the Spirit, right? So it blocks our intuition. We can no longer hear the voice of God or the voice of love, our higher power, right? And what he said, and I loved this because it's happened to me, that if we're badly scared enough, the voice of fear is going to sound like the voice of God. And the voice of fear is going to say, you should do this, this, and this. And if I have not checked that out with someone who knows me, who really knows what my deviant, manipulative, fear-based behavior looks like, that's when I get into trouble. That's when people get hurt, and that's when I get hurt. That's when I become self-righteous, judgmental, intolerant, impatient. Manipulative is a big one for me. Passive-aggressive, mothery. I had 7 kids on purpose, so I have a lot of that. Watch out, people. Those things are not love, right? Love acts only in the spiritual best interests of other people. So I have to be out of fear to know what love would have me do, right? Love is a fiery thing, folks. It's nothing to be messed with. It's not necessarily ribbons and kittens and puppies. Love is the most powerful thing there is. And when you're in unconditional love and you're not afraid, you're going to be extraordinary on the planet. And that is needed right now, right? That's needed right now. But if I'm afraid, not going to happen, okay? All right. Let's read just a little bit more about step 5, because there's such good things in this book too. On page 55 of the AA 12 by 12, bottom of paragraph 1, it says, few steps are harder to take than 5,
but scarcely any step is more necessary to long-time sobriety and peace of mind than this one. AA experience has taught us that we cannot live alone with our pressing problems and the character defects which cause or aggravate them. If we have swept the searchlight of step 4 back and forth over our careers, and it has revealed in stark relief those experiences we'd rather not remember, if we have come to know how wrong thinking and action has hurt us and others, then the need to quit living by ourselves with those tormenting ghosts of yesterday gets more urgent than ever. We have to talk to somebody about them. Now, we aren't in step 9 yet, so we aren't going to talk about the promises yet, although I would love to. But one of the promises in the AA Big Book says, we will not regret the past, nor will we wish to shut the door on it. And the first time I read that, I was like, no way, dudes. There's no way that's ever going to happen for me. It's just not, right? I had so much regret about the past. I was so frightened of my past. It was a mess for me. And this process, this putting it out, what David Wilcox says in one of his songs is, we hold it up to the light. We hold it up to the light. Hold it up to the light. Right? And we reveal ourselves. We become human. We become a part of. We're not isolated and alone anymore. Does that make sense? La la la. The practice, of course, of admitting one's defects to another person is ancient. It has been validated in every century, and it characterizes the lives of all spiritually centered and truly religious people. Okay, you know, when I find a thought like God is love, that's in every single religion I've ever looked at, it's in all of them. God is love, right? I'm like, well, that must be a universal truth, right? That God is love. And confession, or the admitting of wrongs, is another spiritual practice that's old and highly valued by many different religions. I also wrote in my notes here, to be known, to be truly vulnerable, right? To be completely genuine with another human being, it creates freedom. I don't know if any or all of you have ever heard Brene Brown and her hilarious talks on vulnerability. I'm trying to remember exactly what the wholehearted are vulnerable, right? They're vulnerable. When you interact with them, you get who they are at their core, right? Not a facade, not a persona, not something we're pretending, but who we really are.
So you're saying vulnerability is good?
I am saying that flat out.
Thinking's really messed up. Not a good thing to have.
Yeah. So Chris talked a lot when he talked about step 4 about defensiveness, right? So to me, defensiveness is the opposite of vulnerability, right?
Okay.
So when I'm defensive, the walls are there. People can feel them. They usually want to take a step backwards, right? Right? It's a aggressive energy to be defensive. If I interact with you in a defensive way, it's going to automatically make you defensive, okay? Unless you're farther down this path than I am, right? So vulnerability, to be open-hearted, like open-hearted, undefended. Oh, I love this part. So AA has been talked about as a disease of isolation, right? I was one of the most isolated humans on the planet as an Alanon. I was so isolated. Alanon is a disease of isolation, too. And it says on page 57, what are we likely to receive from step 5? For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation that we've always had. Almost without exception, alcoholics, and Alanons are tortured by loneliness. Until we had talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing, we still didn't belong. Step 5 was the answer. Oh, I love this line. It was the beginning of a true kinship with man and God. That's a promise, too. Oh, good. And this is talking about why it's important to share it with another human being on the top of page 59. How could we be certain that we had made a true catalog of our defects and had really admitted them even to ourselves? Because we were still bothered by fear, self-pity, and hurt feelings, it was probable we couldn't appraise ourselves fairly at all. Too much guilt and remorse might cause us to dramatize or exaggerate our shortcomings, or anger and hurt pride might be the smokescreen under which we were hiding some of our defects while we blamed others for them. We have to have outside help. If we were surely to know and admit the truth of ourselves, the help of God and of another human being. Oh, this is good too. So Anne asked a good question about fear. This is kind of goes to the root of what I was trying to talk about. It is worth noting that people of very high spiritual development almost always insist on checking with friends or a spiritual advisor the guidance they feel they have received from God. They check themselves. They check themselves, right? So people of very high spiritual development almost always insist on checking with friends or a spiritual advisor the guidance they feel they have received from God. It's on 60, paragraph 1. That's interesting to me, right? So, again, if I'm afraid and I don't know it, and I'm the queen of denial, right? If I'm afraid or resentful and I don't know it, I am going to be confused about the next right thing to do. I just am. And that's when I step on people's toes. When I'm afraid and I don't know it, and I think I know the next right thing to do. And so we check with others, right? I call it the posse. I have a posse. These people know me really, really well. And they will not co-sign my bullshit. They won't do it, right? They know me well enough that when I talk to them about what's going on and I tell the truth about that, they will not co-sign my bullshit on that. And here's the other thing, friends, that I think is so beautiful. Like I always, when I get mad, my first reaction usually is I want to make a lovely speech of some sort to the people who have aggravated me, right? When I do this work and I get really clear about what's going on with me, what's triggered it, what God wants me to know, what God wants me to do, I almost never make any speeches at all. I do not believe, this really upsets Alanons, and I'm going to say it on film. I don't believe in setting boundaries. I don't. I believe in getting very clear about my own beliefs and behaviors and what God would have me be, do, or believe. And then the boundary gets set by God, and it's unviolable. Nobody gets through it. It is a natural occurrence that happens when God is with me and I'm behaving from love. Now that doesn't mean I never say any things that are, that are difficult or that need to be said, but I'm so prone to wanting to make people behave differently so I feel better. Like, please, I'm dying here. My heart's broken. I'm having a hard. Stop it. Sit down and listen to my speech, right? But love doesn't interfere with the path of others, Love minds its own business. And so I almost never have to say anything to anybody because they're free to be who they are. and they're free to live the way they want to live. It's really none of my business. It's really none of my business. Then also, and I talked about this in step 1 too, it's okay to have deal breakers. Okay, friends, it's okay to have deal breakers. So every person should have deal breakers about what they are willing to live with, right? That's love, right? What is in my spiritual best interest here? So I'm in relationship with an addict or an alcoholic, and they are off the charts nutty, and I cannot get neutral about that behavior. I just can't do it. I'm not able to, right? I'm not walking on water yet, right? I'm just standing at the edge, right? So if I cannot be neutral about that person's behavior, and I've had to do this several times in the last 20 years, I gently withdraw, but I do it in love. I do not do it in judgment. I do not do it in hatred. I do not try to imagine how they should be different or where they're wrong or whatever. I just say, sorry, I can't do this. I've said that to somebody I'm really close to. I'm so sorry, but your behavior frightens me so badly that I cannot hang with you. I just can't. I can't do it. Because I'm going to make you sicker. Because you're going to hang with me and I'm going to try to fix this mess. Because I won't be able to stop myself. Not with this person, okay? It's too tender for me, if that makes sense, right? So when I say I don't set boundaries, I don't mean that, you know, I tolerate any and all things. I do what love would have me do based on the writing, the conversation with my sponsor, my understanding of the steps. And when I get direction like that, I will tell you, friends, even if it's really hard, I try my level best to do it because I know it's in everybody's best interest. Also, addicts and alcoholics, what makes them quit? When do they quit? When they hit bottom, right? When they're so uncomfortable that they're not willing to keep doing what they've been doing. Okay, I needed.
Kind of a detachment?
I would absolutely call it detachment with love. I would absolutely call it that. Like you're free, and I'm gonna maybe pray for you, and I'm gonna wish you well, and I'm gonna hope for the best till I can't anymore, right? But I have watched families deal with children who die, right? Spouses. That is rough stuff, friends, right? But there is a God, right? And what happens when that happens? If that happens to me, I'll be sad. And then I'll be okay. Then I'll be okay. Right? Okay. I think it's funny that you guys got to hear Chris. Engineer brain, Chris. Engineer brain, poet brain. All about the feelings with me, right? All about how I'm feeling. I think that's pretty funny. Also, I have a fear of large men, and he is a full foot taller than me. So when I started working with him, I was like, oh, it's a big guy. What's going to happen next? I got over it. Though. Okay. What else do we need to read out of this? Cool. It's talking about who to talk to, and this is not a rule, okay? But I love what it says here. This person may turn out to be one's sponsor, but not necessarily so. If you have developed a high confidence in him and his temperament and problems are close to your own, then such a choice will be good. Besides, your sponsor already has the advantage of knowing something about your case, right? Your sponsor knows you. Last paragraph. This feeling of being at one with God and man, this emerging from isolation through the open and honest sharing of our terrible burden of guilt, brings us to a resting place. What Diane was talking about, right? Brings us to a resting place where we may prepare ourselves for the following steps and toward a full and meaningful sobriety. Step 5.